Hello, my name is Deanna Hope, and welcome back to Spooky Spotlight, the show where I shine a light on horror films that you may or may not have heard of. Today we are going to be discussing Disturbia, a 2007 psychological thriller directed by DJ Caruso, written by Christopher Landon and Carl Ellsworth. The film starts out with our lead Cale, played by Shia LaBeouf, and his father Daniel, played by Matt Craven. The two of them are fly fishing while having a heart-to-heart. Now, this filming location for the opening scene is absolutely stunning. Like, seriously, what a view. This opening scene was filmed in the Winding Owens River up at Benton Crossing in California, in the Mammoth Lake area. Now, unfortunately, on the drive home, Daniel dies due to them getting hit by a car. Must be extremely traumatizing watching your father die. Going forward throughout the film, there is a theme of Cale kind of blaming himself in a way, which is completely understandable. Cale gets himself out of the wreckage and then ends up going around to see if his father is okay, and unfortunately, we can tell by the expression on Cale's face that his father is no longer with us. Why I love this shot so much, because it says a lot without having to show much. Like, Shia LaBeouf nailed the emotion so well that we know exactly what he's seeing without us having to see it, and we really feel that heartbreak and watch his world shatter in front of our eyes. Now let's fast forward to Cale in school. It's about 6 months later. He's sleeping in the back of the class. You can tell he's fallen down more of a dark path. He's a bit depressed. While we are introduced to his best friend, Ronnie, played by Aaron Yo, who is giving a presentation. Cale is called on to present next, and he clearly did not finish the assignment. He clearly hasn't studied, and his teacher, being visibly frustrated with him and his lack of studying, ends up saying, "What would your father think?" Now, of course, Cale being in such a fragile state, he ends up snapping and he punches his teacher in the face, which, let's be real, like, his teacher did know the situation. Now, because of the fact that he assaulted his teacher, Cale ends up finding himself getting charged. He ends up going to court, and due to his age, he actually could be put in juvie. However, the judge sympathizes with him and ends up only sentencing him to 3 months house arrest. Back home, Cale gets an ankle monitor put on. Disturbia is heavily inspired by the classic film Rear Window, where in Rear Window, our character breaks his leg and that's what ends up isolating him. But the writers of Disturbia thought, how can we isolate a young boy in the modern times of 2007 and get away with it? And I think house arrest is a really fun approach to it. It already kind of makes him less credible because he, in the eyes of the law, would be sort of a criminal. And they also play into the boy who cried wolf aspect of it as well, which really adds to the character and creates a very modern take on it. The cop in charge of checking on him is the teacher's cousin, which I find to be kind of hilarious and adds a comedic tension to the overall dynamic. So now that he's isolated and stuck inside his home, he does what any teenage boy would do. Starts playing Xbox Live, starts listening to Apple Music, starts watching TV, pretty much enjoying his punishment, aka kind of like a vacation to him at this point. And his mom, Julie, played by Carrie Ann Moss, clearly ends up getting tired of his shit over a period of time and ends up canceling his Xbox Live, ends up canceling his Apple Music, and ends up cutting the cord to his TV so he can't watch anymore. So it really takes that usage of technology and fully cuts him off from the world. So not only is he stuck inside, but now he has no way other than his cell phone of really contacting anyone, playing games, nothing. He is left solely to his own devices. We end up going into a montage of him trying to stay sane, which, judging by the Twinkie Tower, I don't think is really lasting that long. The montage is overlaid with the song Lonely Day by System of a Down, which honestly is the perfect song for this and really sets the tone. Now, this boredom and feeling of more and more isolated continues on until one day he notices he's getting some new neighbors, a family with a daughter who catches Cale's eyes almost immediately. Her name is Ashley, played by Sarah Romer. Now, Ashley's room/backyard, where she spends most of her time, is located on the side of the house where Cale's late father's office is. Now, Kale, wanting to scope Ashley out, braves walking into that office for what appears to be his first time since his father's death. Now, something I find interesting is DJ, the director, as well as another crew member, they smoked a few cigars in that office before filming. The reasoning being they wanted Shia to get hit with that smell, and the longingness of his father in the film kind of still there. Because the father was a writer, in DJ's eyes, he would have been a cigar guy, so he wanted that lingering smell for the actor to react to, which is really interesting to me. Kale finds his father's binoculars, and that is where his borderline obsession begins. He starts spying on all his neighbors, discovering one of them is having an affair with his maid. He's also keeping tabs on some rebellious neighborhood kids that continue to ding-dong ditch and leave poop on Kale's doorstep, so he kind of has it out for them. And then as well as his other neighbor, Robert Turner, played by David Morse, who seems to be quiet and keep to himself for the most part, as well as spying on Ashley. So like I said, he hears Robert and immediately it raises alarm bells. So Kale grabs his binoculars and he sees Robert pull a 1965 blue Mustang out of his garage. Now Kale becomes slightly concerned when he sees the blue Mustang has a dent on the right front end. Now the reasoning for Kale being concerned is because earlier on the news he had heard that there is a missing woman who is last seen in a blue Mustang with the same dent. So he starts to wonder if maybe his neighbor Robert may have been responsible for these missing women. Now cut to the next day. During the day, Kale goes outside to spy on Robert through his fence while making sure to keep his ankle monitor within range. Now he thinks Robert caught him, and as you can see, it turns out Robert was acknowledging a rabbit he caught, which he then gets rid of. I love this scene. Placement of Kale being on the same level as the rabbit, Robert talking to the rabbit in this condescending, terrifying, accusing way, in such a way that Kale wholeheartedly thought Robert was talking to him. Kale's life flashed before his eyes in that moment, and honestly, so did mine. Later on that day, Ronnie finally makes it back from vacation and shows up to check on Kale. Kale introduces Ronnie to what he calls his reality TV without the TV. Ronnie and Kale get caught while spying on Ashley, so she comes over and the three of them decide to have a stakeout and see if they can catch Robert in the act. Now later that night, Ronnie is passed out in Kale's bed while Ashley and Kale are kind of flirting, kind of just waiting for any sign of movement next door. When finally they see headlights, Robert shows up with a woman and he escorts this lady inside. Ashley and Kale just kind of observe the two flirting and dancing and laughing while inside, but then they notice Robert pulls out a knife. So immediately Ashley and Kale get concerned, keep their eyes on the girl, but it turns out it was a false alarm and Robert ended up cutting the girl's tag off of her dress. Kale starts panicking, grabs his camera, starts recording while keeping an eye on them, and then the lights go out. In a panic moment, Kale accidentally sets the flash off on his camera. He ducks for cover, scared that he's been caught spying. But while in desperate search to find wherever this girl is, he ends up looking into a window where Robert Turner is staring directly at Kale in the most menacing way. Now, I absolutely love this shot as well because instead of Robert looking at Kale, it looks like Robert is looking at the audience, is looking at us, and it really puts the audience in Kale's perspective and gives us that fear that Robert is watching us. So once they realize it's a false alarm, Ashley and Ronnie both head home for the night. Kale half-heartedly keeps an eye on the lady and Robert for the rest of the night, but not really paying too much attention until he hears a scream. He grabs his binoculars and he sees that the girl is running throughout Robert's house, seemingly fearing for her life. In a panic state, Kale calls Ronnie, explaining that he thinks Robert had killed the woman. Now, Ronnie also starts panicking until moments later when Kale seems to see this woman walk out of Robert's house, get in her car, and drive away. Now, it seemed to be her. However, you don't really ever see her face once she leaves the house. You only see her hair and her dress and her get in the vehicle and take off. Later that day, Robert Turner ends up at Kale's house, where he apparently had run into Kale's mother in the grocery store and helped her bring her groceries in, introducing himself to her and asking her out on a date, which she does accept. Later in the night, Kale is awoken by headlights and the sound of a car pulling into Robert's driveway. Now, it turned out it was Robert in his Mustang. He pulls a large garbage bag out of his car and drags it into the house, which obviously is very suspicious in Cale's eyes and everyone's eyes. So the next day, he calls Ronnie and convinces Ronnie to sneak into Robert's car, steal his garage code, so then they can see what's in the garbage bag. Now, while Ronnie is sneaking into Robert's car, they needed a lookout. They needed to make sure Robert wasn't on his way home, so they had Ashley tail him. Ashley tails him, following Robert to the hardware store, where she ends up running into one of her friends and loses track of Robert Turner. So she runs to her car in the parking garage in a panicked state, trying to find him. Now again, Disturbia just keeps killing it with the good shots, with the tension. In this scene of this grown man getting in this young girl's car and taking her keys from her and having this tense talk. You can cut the tension with a knife in this scene. Having this tense talk saying pretty much, stay away from me or you will be next. Cale calls Ronnie in a panicked state that the fact that Robert was in his house, and then Ronnie, in an equally panicked state, explain to Cale that he left his phone in Robert's car. So Ronnie heads over to Robert's house, equipped with a camera that is live streaming to Cale's TV, so Cale can keep an eye on him, which leads us to almost an homage to found footage films. I really love that aspect, and I also love that the camera is night vision, adding more of a creepy, more unsettling element to the scene itself. Because let's face it, we are all afraid of the dark. He successfully gets into the garage, and he ends up lucking out. The car in the garage ends up being unlocked. He finds his phone, and then he starts snooping around and trying to find that garbage bag from earlier. Now, he also notes that it does smell like rotting flesh, so that is immediately a warning sign. Suddenly, the garage door starts to close, and at the same time, Ronnie says he hears something behind him, and then the connection starts to become kind of spotty. Ronnie now is running through the house, and then the connection completely cuts out once he says that someone is chasing him. Now, Cale does what all of us would do in this moment. He grabs a baseball bat and runs to save his friend without hesitation. He runs out of his house and past his ankle monitor boundaries, which immediately sets off his ankle monitor, notifying the police. The front door ends up being open to Robert's house, so Cale goes to enter. Before he can, the police end up showing up and putting him in handcuffs. Cale tells them to check the house and that there's a body in the garage. So they do, and they find nothing. In the garage, turns out it was a dead animal, and Ronnie is nowhere to be seen. Cale goes upstairs in order to keep an eye on his mom, however, is also still wondering where Ronnie is when he receives a text from Ronnie's phone saying, "Look in your closet." Now, Cale, freaked out, hesitates but walks towards the closet and ends up finding Ronnie in there. Ronnie ends up joking around with him. He turns out he was fine and he managed to get out, and Cale was not appreciative of that joke whatsoever. The cops take Cale back to his house and inform Julie that they have to go to court in the morning. Julie heads over to Roberts to try and convince him not to press charges, as it is a violation of Cale's house arrest. Cale is watching the footage of Ronnie in the house while also keeping an eye on his mom, who is still at Turner's house. Ronnie is downstairs goofing off and finding some food or whatever, when Cale notices in the playback footage that there is a body on video in Robert's house hidden in a vent. Meanwhile, Robert attacks Julie and knocks her out. Cale yells down to Ronnie to warn him of this situation when Robert knocks Ronnie out with a bat and then comes upstairs and ties Cale up. Once Cale comes to, Robert explains to him how he should have kept to his own business, should have left Robert alone, and if he did, he would have been fine. But unfortunately, it is too late, and Robert is forced to kill Cale and frame him. He's gonna have Cale writing a note saying that I snapped, I killed my mom, and I killed my best friend. And just to hammer that idea in that is real, Robert is then going to stage Cale's suicide. Right before Robert is about to kill Cale, Ashley shows up at the exact time she is needed, and she helps Cale escape. And then they escape by jumping off the roof into Ashley's pool. He lets Ashley know, hey, go make sure the cops get here. I'm gonna go get my mom. So Cale enters Turner's house. He ends up finding a room where he falls through floor into a pit of water dirt and dead bodies. He crawls out and continues forward, eventually finding his mom. Robert already had gotten to and had her in his grasp. So then Robert throws his mom and ends up fighting Cale. They have a big battle, and eventually Cale ends up killing Robert and escaping with his mom. Cut to black. All right, that is it for this episode. Thank you again. Please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you like the new format and if you end up watching the film. I'll see you on the next one.